All right, so let's start with number 50. So for number 50, they wanted us to simplify, and we're not allowed to leave any negative exponents in our answer. So you can break this up how you want to, but I started with this first one right here, and I just went through and squared each one of those. So you can see I did 2 squared, I did a to the 4th squared, I did b squared squared. And then I just copied this second guy down. All right, so if we simplify this a little bit, 2 squared is 4. When you have a power raised to a power, you multiply. So we're going to do 4 times 2 is 8 to get a to the 8th. And then 2 times 2 is 4 to get b to the 4th. All right, so now I'm going to put like things together. So I'm going to multiply 4 times negative 2. And I'm going to multiply a to the 8th times a to the negative 5th. And b to the 4th times b to the negative 6. So I'm basically like putting my numbers together, putting my a's together, putting my b's together. All right, so 4 times negative 2, of course, is negative 8. But when your bases are the same and you're multiplying, you add your exponents. So I'm going to add 8 and negative 5 and get a positive 3. Same thing with my b's, when my bases are the same and I'm multiplying, I'm going to add that 4 and negative 6, and I'm going to get negative 2. So this would be my answer, except for, if you'll notice up here, it says eliminate all negative exponents. So the only thing I still have to do is get rid of this negative 2 on the b. So remember, to get rid of a negative, you just move it across the division bar. So this was b to the negative 2 over 1. Move that across the division bar, and it's going to be 1 over b to the positive 2. So then I can put all my numerators together and put all my denominators together, and that's my final answer. All right, so then for the next one, first thing I want to do is factor this denominator, because I want to see if there's anything that could cancel top and bottom. So if I factor x squared minus 5x plus 4, that's going to be x minus 4, x minus 1. Now, a little trick on that is they probably are going to give you something that'll cancel, right? So if you already have your numerator factored, that probably means that your denominator is either going to have an x plus 1 or an x minus 4 in it. So that might make your factoring a little bit faster. But you can see that our x minus 4's canceled out. And so in the numerator, we were left with x plus 1. And in the denominator, we were left with x minus 1. So that was our final answer. I can't cancel like these x's right here and say that's like 1 over negative 1, because remember that you can't cancel things that are being added and subtracted. You can only cancel things that are being multiplied. So that's as simple as that can get. I can't simplify it down any further. All right, then for 52, we are dividing fractions. So remember, when you're dividing fractions, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. You're going to keep, change, flip. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is factor everything. So this guy down here is a difference of squares. I have 2 terms. They're both perfect squares. They're being subtracted. So that's a difference of squares, d plus 3, d minus 3. Same thing with this d squared minus 16. That's a difference of squares. So that's d plus 4 and d minus 4. And then this guy down here, I would just factor like normal and d plus 4 and d plus 3, because I was looking for something that added to be 7 and multiplied to be 12. Okay, so now that everything's factored, I'm going to keep the first one the same. I'm going to change my division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip my second fraction so that I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. And then I'm going to see what I can cancel. Now, remember, you can cancel vertically and you can cancel diagonally. You just can't cancel horizontally. Like I can't cancel something across from each other. All right. So this d minus 4 canceled with this d minus 4. This d plus 4 canceled with this d plus 4. And this d plus 3 canceled with this d plus 3. So in the top, I have 1 times 1 times 1. So just 1 in the top. And in the bottom, I've got 1, d minus 3, 1, 1. So just d minus 3. So that would be my final answer. All right, then for 53, they gave us y equals negative 2x plus 3, and they asked for the slope and the y-intercept. So slope-intercept form is going to be on your formula sheet. The y equals mx plus b will be on there. It won't be labeled. You got to know what it is. But for y equals mx plus b, m is my slope, so that means my slope is negative 2. And then B is my y-intercept, so that means my y-intercept is positive 3. So that's where we got these two guys. All right, and then we're going to graph that. So to graph that, I start at my y-intercept. So I'm going to start at my positive 3. Then my slope is negative 2 over 1. So from that point, I'm going to rise a negative 2 and run a positive 1. Rise a negative 2, run a positive 1. Rise a negative 2, run a positive 1. And you'll notice that all those form a line. Now, if you'd rather, you can just make an XY chart, right? So you could go through and plug in 0 and you'd get 3. Plug in 1, you'd get 1. Plug in 2, you'd get negative 1. Like, that's perfectly fine as well. So whatever you prefer. All right, then for 54, they asked us to find the equation of a line in slope-intercept form. So we're going to write our answer in y equals mx plus b form. That's slope-intercept, right? It passes through the point 8, negative 3. So that's my xy. And it has a slope of 1/4. So that's my m. All right, so I'm going to start off with putting that 1/4 in for m. So I have y equals 1/4 x plus b. If I just find b, then I'm done. I have my equation. So that's the next thing I want to do. And so I'm going to use 8 for x and negative 3 for y. So you can see negative 3 for y, 8 for x, and then the only unknown is b, and I'll be able to solve for that. All right, so if we do 1/4 times 8, that's going to give us positive 2. And then subtract that 2 from both sides, we'd get b is negative 5. So let's bring that right up here and put it in the place of that b, and we would have y is equal to 1/4 x minus 5. All right, then for 55, they gave me two binomials to multiply. So we're going to FOIL those. So we're going to do 3x times 2x is 6x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x. Negative 5 times 2x is negative 10x. And negative 5 times positive 4 is negative 20. So the only like terms I have are these two right here in the middle, the 12x minus 10x. So that's going to give me 2x. And so that's where we get our trinomial answer. All right, then factoring, we're going the opposite way, right? So we're going to take what's been multiplied together and break it back apart into its factors. So for 56, we have a difference of squares. Now, we saw that just a minute ago. It's when your first term is a perfect square, your last term is a perfect square, and then you're subtracting. So if you have a difference of squares, you only have two terms. That makes it easy to spot. And so it's just going to be a squared has to be a times a, and b squared has to be b times b, one sign plus, one sign minus. All right. So for x squared minus 64, x squared would be x times x. 64 would be 8 times 8, one sign plus, one sign minus. There's our difference of squares. All right, then for 57, we have 4 terms. So when we have 4 terms, we factor by grouping. So I'm going to group those first 2 terms together, and I'm going to group my last 2 terms together. Okay, so look at those first 2 terms and see what is your greatest common factor that you could take out. So you could take out an x squared. So if you take out an x squared, you're left with x minus 1. Then over here, I could take out a 9 or I could take out a negative 9. The way that I know which one is that these have to match, right? If I got x minus 1 here, I have to get x minus 1 here. And so I need to factor out a negative 9 in order to get the x minus 1s to match. Okay, so now since I have x minus 1 as a common factor, let's take that out. And then we said you can like put your finger over this x minus 1 and this x minus 1, and what you've got left is your other factor. Now, when it says factor completely, that means that you've got to break it all the way down where it can't be factored any further. If you'll notice this x squared minus 9 right here, like that's a difference of squares again, right? So x squared minus 9 would be x plus 3x minus 3. So once I get it all the way factored down, then to solve it, I just set each one of those factors equal to 0. So I'm going to take that x minus 1 and set it equal to 0. That'd be 1. X plus 3 set equal to 0. We would get negative 3. And x minus 3 set equal to 0. Add the 3 to both sides, and we'd get x equals 3. So we got 3 roots, and this was a degree of 3. So that makes sense that we should be getting 3 solutions. All right, then 58. The length of Crossbones Cafe is 8 yards more than the width, and the perimeter is 88 yards. What are the dimensions of the cafe? Okay, so remember with our word problems, we said if you're not sure where to start at the end. So the end tells us what we're trying to find. So it says, what are the dimensions of the cafe? So that lets me know I need to find the length and the width. Okay, so I drew myself a picture. You don't have to, but it just kind of makes it easier for me to see. So it said that the length is means equals. So length equals 8 more than width. So I can say length equals 8 more than width. So I'm going to call the width W. So that means these would be my widths. Those would be W. And then this would be 8 plus W again. Okay, so perimeter. Because it says the perimeter is 88. Remember, perimeter is the sum of the sides. It goes all the way around, right? So we're going to add up our sides. So we're going to say 8 plus W plus W plus 8 plus W plus W. So that's what you see right here. We just added up those 4 sides is equal to 88. All right, so let's combine some like terms. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 W's, and then 8 and 8 is 16. So if we subtract the 16 from both sides and divide by 4, we'll get W is equal to 18. Now, remember we said start at the end and stop at the end. Make sure that you answer the question that was asked. The question was, what are the dimensions? Meaning, what's the length and the width? So we just found the width was 18. We still have to go back and find the length. So the length was 8 more than the width. That would be 8 more than 18. So that would be 26. So we could say then that our dimensions are going to be 8 yards by 26 yards. All right, then we move into imaginary numbers. All right, so let's start off with some adding and subtracting and some simplifying radicals. Okay, so before I start combining these guys, I want to make sure they're all in lowest terms. This negative 20 right here, not in lowest terms. So let's come over here and think about it. Square root of negative 20 is going to be the square root of 20 times the square root of negative 1. All right, so let's think about breaking down that 20. So if I break down 20, that's going to be 4 times 5, and the 4 would be 2 times 2. So if you have a pair, you can take it out from under the square. So I can take out the 2's, but the 5 would be left underneath. So take out the 2, the 5 is left underneath. And then the square root of negative 1 is I. So that's why right here for the square root of negative 20, that's where we got the 2 square roots of 5i. Okay, so now this negative is going to get distributed to everything that comes after it and change those signs. So that's why we have a negative 2 and a negative square root of 5i. All right, then here this 2 is going to get distributed. So 2 times 2 square roots of 5 is going to be 4 square roots of 5i. So now let's start combining like terms. So obviously 6 minus 2 is 4. But these two guys are like terms as well because the radical and the index are the same, meaning this is a square root of 5 and this is a square root of 5. So I had 4 of them here minus 1 of them. That's going to leave me 3 of them. So I would have 3 square roots of 5i. All right, then for 60, we're foiling. All right, so we're going to start off by saying 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times 6i is 42i. Negative 2i times 3 is negative 6i. Negative 2i times positive 6i is negative 12i squared. Now, I is not a variable, but it works just like one. Like if you had an x right there and you foiled, that's what you would get, right? So you can think of it that way. Remember that I squared is a negative 1, so I'm going to replace this I squared with negative 1. And so negative 12 times negative 1 is going to give us positive 12. The 42i minus 6i gives us the 36i. And then 21 and 12 is going to be 33. Now, when they say give your answer in standard form, they mean A plus BI form. So that's why we're writing this 33 plus 36i. I wouldn't write 36i plus 33.